Hi, welcome to Board Gems. This is my regular video series in which I introduce older board game gems with you. I usually have new videos on the 3rd, 13th, and 23rd of the month. This week, I've been crazy busy. Oh my gosh. And I was thinking like, oh my god, I'm worried I'm going to miss my next video, which is scheduled for February 13th. I thought, what's the easiest thing that I could do? Or the quickest, or the one that has the least work in terms of editing and stuff. So I decided to do a mailbag episode. So anyway, this is supposed to be the last mailbag episode, but I think I've said that several episodes in a row. I keep thinking the one that I'm recording is the last episode, and then it goes really long, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'll put off the rest of the questions for another video. This is, as far as I know, the last video. It's almost a tradition that I say that, and it turns out to not be the last mailbag video. But this is not on any particular topic. This is a grab bag, just random miscellaneous questions I've got over the last couple months. And I decided to just take all the questions that I had up to that point and just put them all in a one possibly final mailbag episode. And that is possibly this one. Favorite card only game. So my favorite game that only features cards as components is probably Crazy Chicken, otherwise known as Drive, otherwise known as Call to Glory, otherwise known as Littlewood. If you change the I to a Y, it makes it seem more exotic, more fantastical. Great two-player game. You can play it with more. Starting with Drive, every version has been technically 2 to 4 players, but Crazy Chicken, 2-player only game, and it's absolutely the best way to play. No doubt about it. To expand on that topic a little bit about the card games, my favorite trick-taking game is Skull King, which I will probably do a video on, but I haven't really decided yet, because Skull King is basically Wizard with special cards, and Wizard already is a trick-taking game that is basically a regular deck of cards, but adds a couple of special cards, while Skull King adds a couple of additional extra cards. And I guess I'll throw in, like, what's my favorite game you could play with a regular deck of cards? That would be Dodiju, which I'm pronouncing terribly. It's translates to Fight the Landlord. It's a Chinese climbing card game for 3 players exactly. And it's a great game. It has appeared in hobby channels, like a hobby-fied version of Dodiju called Chimera, which I'll probably cover in a future video. I would really like to hear more thoughts about the modern game scene and why you don't like it. I'm not sure whether you mean the game scene or modern games. I should probably separate the two. In terms of modern games, I don't think I've ever made any secret that I find newer modern board games really unsatisfying to me. And the reason for that is because a lot of times they're really solitarish. I play board games to enjoy my time with other people. For me, board games are a social activity. Now, that doesn't mean I love party games, although there are some party games that I do like. I do prefer a little bit of thought, but to me, the whole idea of sitting down and focusing on a super complex brain-burny game for 3 hours or something with strangers, that's not a fun experience to me. I want to play with my family. I want to play with my good friends, colleagues maybe, if I can introduce them, things like that. For me, board games, even the kind of thinkier board games, are still in the end a social activity. But they might be a social activity you're doing with other people who like to think, bit of a nerdy activity. In the end, to me, the most important part is playing with other people. I mean, it's not like the game doesn't matter at all. I have preferences. There are games I like more than other games. But to me, there has to be at least a shared experience. And I don't get that vibe of the shared experience from modern board games. And you know what? There have been older board games, and I've covered a few of them for the channel, that are real multiplayer solitaire games. Games like, well, I haven't done Take It Easy yet, but that's kind of the prime example. But I've done Fits and Bits and Cities. And these are all games in which everybody basically plays the same puzzle-like game together. And I don't mind those so much because it's a shared experience. You flip over the card or you draw the tile and everybody sees the same thing. And maybe for some people, they're like, yes. And for other people, they're like, oh no. And you're all reacting at the same time. And that's a shared experience. But when you have something like, I'll give you an example, Calico. So the way the game plays is kind of interesting. It's nice and puzzly, and it certainly looks very nice. But that's multiplayer solitaire that you can't play at the same time. So it's my turn, and I'm doing a thing, and then it's the next player's turn. The other players do not add anything to the experience except time. A 4-player game will probably take twice as long as a 2-player game, but the fact that you're joined by 2 more good friends, don't feel it. Doesn't matter who you're playing with because there's no social experience. But the question here refers to the modern game scene. And I'm not super confident I can talk a great deal about that because I'm almost not really in the modern game scene. But I think it's kind of connected to the style of games that come out now. And they kind of feed each other. I haven't really thought this really through, so you can probably poke a million holes in this. I'm thinking about this kind of right now, not planned in advance, so I'll see if I can piece it together. Let's say back in the late 90s, which is actually technically before I was in the hobby, but a lot of my favorite games come from the 90s. 90s, early 2000s. What happens is even the hobby games or the gamers games would still be streamlined, maybe simplified, get the game length down. It's maybe under 90 minutes, for example. And the thought is that, yes, it's a hobby game. Yes, probably only hobbyists would be kind of interested in it. But it's still possible for a non-gamer who is interested and maybe has some people to help them kind of learn the game. They can definitely play that type of game. So they're hobby games that can also be played by kind of focused casual gamers who have an interest in it. Now, as publishers started to aim games more at the hobby market, they were able to give hobbyists what they wanted. And hobbyists want more and more complexity. And I see a lot of comments like, well, yeah, this is a pretty well-designed game, but it's too simple, right? And there are games that are really simple, but to me, simplicity isn't a deal breaker. You wouldn't dismiss a game just because it was simple. But for some people, they only want to play the more involved games. I have a kind of theory about these sort of modern Euros, modern board games, and the modern environment that builds the buzz and the hype for them. Take the convention experience, for example. It seems like a lot of people, when they go to conventions, they're there to learn the new game. They heard about 2 or 3 or 4 board games that got a lot of buzz, maybe at other conventions, or they read about it on the internet and they really want to try it, and they heard that that game was at that convention. Now think of the type of game that would excel in an environment in which you're playing with strangers. And some of those strangers might not have very good social skills. I mean, you go to any convention or really any place that has a lot of people, and you're going to be, grouped with a couple of random ones, you're probably going to have a dick among them, right? Just a real jerk who's going to make everybody's life miserable. What kind of game suffers in that environment? A game that's very interactive. Maybe it has a lot of talking, or it maybe has a lot of like my play might affect other people's play in a way that I didn't foresee. Kingmaking is an example, but also I do a strategy that benefits myself, but it also happens to benefit the leader, and then a third person complains that I'm helping the leader. Oh, I can't believe you're doing that, kind of thing. The most interactive games are susceptible to a bad experience in that environment. But consider the low interaction modern board game. You can play that with anybody. In fact, oftentimes you don't even have to play it with a person. You can play it with an AI or just by yourself, right? Maybe you have other players there and they're randomizers, but you don't have to deal with them as people. right? Maybe you don't even have to talk. You just play the game that's in front of you, right? So those are the games that really benefit in a convention environment, and conventions are often where games can build up buzz. And another factor, and again, I haven't really thought this through fully, I'm sure you can poke a dozen holes in this. But of course, one thing that's changed now is that a lot of people get their information about board games from YouTube. There are a fair number of YouTubers out there that this is their job. Their main source of income is doing YouTube videos. So they want to do a lot of YouTube videos. They want to cover a lot of games. And in order to be caught by the algorithm, if there's a game that's interesting to people, they're going to be searching for it. And you want to be first, right? You want to have your YouTube video out there first to catch that algorithm. So when people start searching for it, and there aren't that many YouTube videos out there, people find yours. And they watch yours, and then you're making the ad money, right? So I feel like there's a lot of incentives on the part of the YouTuber, the YouTube board game reviewer, say, to cover many games and to cover newer games and to cover the newer games as quickly as possible. A lot of the older games feel very different with different player counts. You know, I've described the idea of a Goldilocks game, right? A game that feels very loose and wide open and maybe not very tense, a little bit too easy with, say, 3 players. And with 5 players, it's just a super cutthroat, tense game because the board is too crowded and stuff like that. And maybe 4 is kind of the sweet spot. But a lot of these modern games, it doesn't really matter how many players you have. You can have 2, 3, 4, 1 even. It basically feels like the same game, right? And you can replace players with AIs. And the game still kind of works because all the AI is doing is just kind of getting in your way like a player would accidentally. Now, one advantage of this type of game is the game feels very similar at 4 players and 3 players and 2 players and maybe even 1 player. So you can play a game with 2 players. Maybe you play it with your partner. And you have some confidence that you don't have to seek out different types of people to see how the game works in a different environment with different types of people and different player counts. It's going to be a very consistent experience. So you can, for example, play with just your partner and play it enough times with just your partner to get a pretty good feel for the game. And you have some confidence that a 3-player game or 4-player game and playing more people and different people with different groups is going to be a similar experience. And so you don't have to judge that. Me, one of the reasons that I don't really cover new games all that much, besides the fact that I'm not staying on top of them, is that I don't feel I can do that. I feel like if I want to review a game, of course, I want to review the games that are the type that I like, which are very interactive games, but that means I need to play it 3-player and 4-player and 5-player and find out what it's like at all these player counts. And ideally, maybe I play it 3-player with my family, but I play it 3-player also with my game group. And maybe 3 players at a convention if I can manage it. And because I'm playing with different people, the experience might be different. But with a lot of these modern games, you don't have to. You can just play a 2-player. It's basically the same thing. Don't even worry about it. So both of these kind of feed the tendency for the publishers to focus on the solitary experience. And that's just not my jam. Not my jam. What are some other good behind-the-scenes publisher, designer, game, etc. stories that you haven't talked about? I'm a little reluctant to go into too many of those stories because I'm always worried I'm going to make a mistake. These stories are all said from memory. Usually because I listened to a podcast years ago or something, some random interview with a designer. So please always remember that my stories might get a couple of details wrong and may in fact be completely false because I'm relying on, an alternate source that I can now no longer remember where I even heard that. So please always take what I say with a big grain of salt. One card game that I really, really like is San Juan, which is the card game version of Puerto Rico, designed by Andreas Seifert, who is a great designer. He doesn't design very many games, but all his games pretty much are notable. and he's won Spiel des Jahres for Manhattan and Turin, Texas. You may know of a similar game called Race for the Galaxy, which is designed by Tom Lehman. They are similar in the same core concept, which is cards are money. So you have a hand of cards. They're cards that you can play to your tableau in front of you, but in order to pay for them, you have to pay with other cards in your hand. Maybe you don't want to pay other cards because you also want to build those later, so there's a nice tension there. The story goes that Seifert was working on the San Juan card game, the Puerto Rico card game. In fact, in Germany, it's now called the Puerto Rico card game, but traditionally it's been known as San Juan. And supposedly he was having a little bit of trouble with it, or at least he wasn't satisfied with it. Seifert strikes me as a perfectionist, simply because he doesn't publish very many games. So I feel like every game he's put out has been a game that's really, really polished, and Puerto Rico is a definite example of that. The game that would become Race for the Galaxy, I don't know if it was called Race for the Galaxy at that time. It wasn't published, but it was a design that Tom Lehman was kind of, shopping around with the publishers and was working on kind of, publicly, in the sense that publishers knew about it. Alea basically approached Tom Lehman and asked if they can use, or Seifert and Alea can use that kind of core mechanism from Race for the Galaxy, the paying of cards with other cards, as sort of the basis for San Juan. Even though Race for the Galaxy had not yet been published yet. The danger, of course, is that if San Juan is published and it's popular, maybe there isn't a market anymore for Race for the Galaxy, because maybe people will be like, well, we already saw that, right? So they did offer to share royalties with Lehman. Lehman agreed anyway, and San Juan came out, and it was very, very popular. And, of course, Race for the Galaxy came out later, and at least in North America, I think Race for the Galaxy ended up being more popular than San Juan in the end, and had a lot more expansion, certainly. And I believe Lehman said that he ended up sharing royalties with Seifert for Race for the Galaxy. Even though Race for the Galaxy technically didn't have any input from Seifert, Race for the Galaxy was developed independently. Seifert borrowed that mechanism and shared royalties in way of thanks. And Tom Lehman was nice enough that when he finally got Race for the Galaxy published with Rio Grande Games, that he ended up offering the same to Seifert, which I think is a really great example of just two professionals, and the publishers involved, of course, but I'm talking specifically about Seifert and Lehman, just coming together. They have their own games that there's going to be overlap, and they kind of share in the royalties for both of them. And I think it's just a nice kind of a show of respect on both sides. Sometimes I think it's interesting about Essen, which I've never been to, but I would love to go, that there are some designers who got their start by selling games at Essen. They'll design their own games, right? And then they'll sell them at Essen. But technically, if you want to sell games at Essen, you have to pay to be like a vendor, right? So you can sell. You're not supposed to just go there and sell games. You should be paying the fair organizers, right? There are a number of German designers that got their start self-publishing games, maybe not really great quality, just making their own games, making their own designs, but getting the word out. And this would have even been, early days of the internet, so not necessarily easy to find out that these games are around. Supposedly, the reason that Freedom and Frieza has green hair is so that people could find him at Essen. So he would have a backpack full of his games, and then somebody would see the green hair and they'd go to him and say, hey, you're Frieza, can I buy, fresh fish from you or something, right? And then he would have the games in his backpack and they could make the exchange. This information was shared to me via Rick. Thank you, Rick. But in the old days, if you wanted to buy a game from Dirk Henn, from his own company, him and his wife, DB Spiele, you wanted to buy one of his games, you had to find Dirk Henn. How do you find Dirk Henn? Maybe you can't find him. You look around, you can't find him. So what you end up having to do is you had to go to maybe like one of the vendor halls and ask around and be like, hey, have you seen Dirk Henn around? I want to buy one of his games. And people are like, no, I haven't seen him, And then you ask around enough, eventually Dirk Hand comes to you. Say, hey, I heard you were looking for me. So you have to kind of figure out a way to get people to find them so then they can sell their games without having to pay the vendor's fee. I think that's really, really a fun story. My wife enjoys playing games with me, but offers zero feedback on what games I buy for us. How involved are your wife and son in choosing the games you buy/keep? Buying? None at all. They're not into the hobby. They're not reading up on other games and say, hey, Daryl, I think I would like this game that I heard of. Can you get that? That basically doesn't happen. But I try to consider the types of games they like when I consider new games to introduce to them. Sometimes what happens is there'll be a game, and for me this was Sans Souci. This is a joke in my household now. That Sans Souci was a game that I overanalyzed, read about, and this is a game my wife's going to love. She's going to think it's beautiful because it's about the gardens, and you're kind of working on your own thing, right? And building your garden, your own personal garden. So based on everything I knew about Sans Souci, I thought my wife would really like it. And I got it, and I introduced it, and she thought it was fine. I played it maybe twice and never again. My mistake was I would think okay, my wife likes X, Y, and Z. Here's a game that has X, Y, and Z. Perfect. I'll get that and introduce it. And, there's a magic spark that you don't find if you just, go by a bullet list of features, right? You need to feel is this a game that's going to capture people's imagination and is going to be fun in that? What is fun, right? That's not a bullet point. At least that's not one that's easy to identify. Keeping a game, of course I take their considerations into consideration. I really need a bigger vocabulary. And I have my own personal favorite games that they hate, that they wouldn't want to play, but I love them. Do I get rid of them? No. At some point in the future, I might have a chance to play this game, maybe with other people, maybe with my friends, or maybe new friends that I make. And I'm going to regret not having that game because I love it. So I have games that they love, and I have games that I love. And games that we can all kind of accept as fine. Do you have a cap on how many games you own at a time? Or is that not an issue because you buy and sell regularly? I don't have an artificial cap. I know there are some people who are I'm going to have no more than 200 games, and that's it. If I get a 201st game, then one of my existing games has to go. It's nothing as formal as that. My limit is what I can fit in this room. This is our sort of rec room, our hobby room. We have the ping pong table here, and I have shelves around. So if I fill up on space, then yeah, I'm going to have to make room for something, right? If I want to bring new things in. I do trade regularly. There's a local organizer of math trade here in Vancouver that I think is quarterly, and that's a big help. It's hard to sell games locally, but for trading other games, it's great. It's a lot of fun. It's always great every quarter almost to meet up. It's because it's an in-person meetup and you just trade all the games. It's great to touch base with everybody, especially during the pandemic when we do that. And it's I haven't seen you in ages kind of thing. So I do trade regularly, but shipping is just so expensive. Really local is the only way I can do it. I used to take part in the Canada-wide math trades because the international math trades are crazy expensive in shipping. But now even though Canada-wide ones are crazy expensive, so it's mostly just local for me. What are your thoughts on session reports, either written or video? I find them interesting and also annoying. Have you ever written up plays? And do session/play reports have value over or in addition to reviews? That used to be the main way of getting a feel for the games. People would write up a session report, right? It's I don't know much about this game. And you read a session report where somebody describes the game, how, what happened, who was playing. but also often goes into kind of the arc, right? What particular area was the competition in and stuff. And you can get a good feel for a game by a session report. So they do have use. Are they worth writing? Yes. If the play was particularly memorable. If you had just the most amazing experience of a game, write that up, put up a session report, because you don't want that lost. You don't want to forget about that. When you play a game and it's elevated and you have that just amazing experience with the other friends, and there's a really dramatic part to it, right? Put that down, write that down. Don't let that get lost to memory. And 5 years, 10 years, you read that, and it's like, maybe you don't remember the details, but you just read that journal entry or that session report, and the broad strokes will come back to you, and that'll be great. So session reports do still have use, absolutely, but I admit I don't read them very much, and I think I've written one or two, but not much. You have a lot of games, and night in, night out, you see a ton of games getting played. What are some of the games that people love in your restaurant that don't show up on people's top 10 lists all the time, or that seem somewhat underrated and underappreciated by hardcore hobbyists at BGG? It's not just the games that the people in the restaurant are playing that maybe the hobbyists don't necessarily respect. Like, there's a lot of that. A lot of times the patrons who are familiar with games, they already know about Board Game Geek, and they want to play the games that are highly rated. But nowadays, the games that are most highly rated are games we're not going to have in the restaurant, right? We're not going to have Gloomhaven in the restaurant. We're not going to have Terraforming Mars. It's just too long. We will have Ares Expedition. I don't have it yet, but we will get that one because that's shorter. But like these big, long hobby games, no. But there are lots of people who just come and they want to play something and they don't really know what to play. And then I have my go-to recommendations, right? And there are also games that I just see people play and I'm a little bit surprised. Like, I'm surprised that, I haven't really heard much about that game and they seem to love it. So that's kind of cool. There's some games that are kind of older and forgotten about. You don't see people on BGG talking about them anymore, but they're still popular in the restaurant. Fauna was recommended. It was nominated for Game of the Year, but it did not win. Fauna is a great game. There were some sequels by Bezier Games that weren't as popular, but Fauna still remains popular. I see Flashpoint, which happens to be my favorite cooperative game, and that still gets play in the restaurant, which is neat. I still see like Bonanza and Saboteur, Bang, Rummy Cube, Downfall of Pompeii. These games all get regular play. What are some surprises? I see Bob Ross, The Art of Chill, get taken off the shelf quite a bit. I don't recall if I've seen it played, but usually at the end of the night, if I go in and I see that that's on the table set aside for games that were played, and it's like often the Bob Ross Art of Chill game is there, and it's like, okay, I wonder. I've never played it, but maybe it's good. An obscure one is Gotham. That's from Calliope Games. Have you heard of this game? I don't know where I got this game. I think it was one of the games that we had when we first opened in 2014. I think that was one of our opening games. And we like, my families come in and the kids look for it, right? Like, where's Gotham? I'm like, okay, cool. What are some games with a great ratio of teaching time versus playing time without having to ask you rules questions time and time again? So again, I'm going to think of this from the restaurant's point of view, like if I'm introducing games, because these are like my go-to games, right? If somebody doesn't know what to play, I don't get the impression they've played any games. These are the ones I go to. So usually the experience is, I see somebody looking at the shelf and they're going like this, right? They can't, they have no idea what to even find. So first thing I ask is, are you looking for something in particular? And they're like, oh no, I just want, looking for something to play. I'm like, okay, well, do you want a recommendation? Oh, that'd be great. Thank you. It's like, sure. What kind of games do you normally play? And so if they say, oh, I don't really play many games, then I usually have a couple of go-tos. So One is Ghost Blitz. It's a speed reaction game. Another good speed reaction game is Wanted. I like that one a lot too, and that always gets a lot of laughs, Wanted, and that's usually pretty easy to explain as well. The other one is Timeline / Cardline. It's kind of a trivia style game almost, and both of those work really, really well with pretty much everybody that I introduce it to, and different size groups you can play. Just 2 people, you can play it with as many people as can see and reach. If there are kids involved, I will often recommend Cockroach Poker. It's for little kids especially. I often like to do Cockroach Poker, even though it's technically not a little kids game, but there's just something subversive about a kid lying to their parents, right? So usually when I teach it, right, if it's a little kid, the little kid's like nervous. It's like, is this going to be like, is this okay? And then I will explain, it's like, normally you can't lie to your parents, but in this game, it's okay. And of course, it's so much fun for the parents because they can usually tell the kid's lying, right? But the kid doesn't know that. So the kid's trying to lie. And then the parents, this is really cute, right? Another one is Banana Macho, which is a speed dice rolling game from Zach that has a squeaky banana. You can't go wrong with a squeaky banana. One that is very obscure nowadays, but I've had a lot of success teaching it, is a game called Paradiso. It's a 2-player game, 2-player abstract game actually, from Foxmind, which I don't think it's around at all anymore. But the idea is you have 16 tiles, and they each have some combination on the face of land and sea. So you mix them all face down, and then split them so both of the 2 players have 8 tiles each. You flip them all face up so you can see each other's tiles, and you take turns adding a tile to a 4x4 grid. The grid is not defined in advance, so if it's 3 wide, you can put a tile on either end, and now that's the 4 in the 4x4, right? And of course, you have to match side to side. And the goal is simply to be the last player who's able to successfully play a piece. So simple to teach. Visually, it looks great. It's kind of similar to Carcassonne, but it's got wooden tiles. There's only 16 of them, but they're wooden tiles. And it's just such an easy game to teach, and it's a nice little, diversion for 2 people who just want a simple game, doesn't take up much space, but, tickles the brain cells, right? So that's a good one. Onitama is another good abstract. Nowadays, I tend to recommend King Domino a lot. It's just so easy to teach, so easy to explain that one. Some years ago, I bought a black 5x5 Kallax. When I move, I'll probably ditch that piece of furniture for something a bit less rigid. IIRC, you're a Bestå apologist. Can you expand on that? And is it suitable for a horizontal store like me? I'm a Bestå apologist, huh? I guess I am. So these shelves here, this is Bestå, okay? So I always hear, all the time, people in the hobby, they're always Kallax this, or it was Expedite, I guess, was the Expedite. That was the old one, and now it's Kallax, basically the same thing. But I've always liked Bestå. Now, the advantages of Bestå are that they're stronger, they're sturdier than a Kallax, and the shelves are fully adjustable. So I don't know if you can see from this angle, but holes go all along here. Like, there aren't gaps. Like, the Billy shelves, there's like a couple of holes, then there's a gap, and there's a couple of holes, like where you put the shelf pins. So it's adjustable, but not fully, right? You still have to be within a range. And these ones, you can put your shelves wherever you want. For sturdiness, for the stability, you want one shelf that's kind of locked in, but you can also unlock it, right? But Kallax, you can't do that. Kallax, they're designed to be that cube, those square pigeonholes. And I know some people like will leave out one board so they can fit in long games or something, but to me that's one of the big things about Bestå. Bestå also has a back, which I think is just nicer visually. Personally, I don't usually like lose pieces behind the shelves, but I still like to have the back there. I really like the Bestå. It does have some disadvantages though. For one, it's more expensive. Better things cost more. Huh, what a world. Bestås are visually a little obnoxious. You can't tell here because you're looking at them face on. But like if you were to have just one or even two, and you put it there, because they're really deep. So if you think you can just get a 1 or 2 columns and just stick it in a corner somewhere, it's going to look like this giant monolith in your home. It doesn't blend, I feel, as well as a Kallax would. But you mentioned horizontal storage, so yeah, if you look at some old videos of mine, you may see that I used to store games in here horizontally. I am a horizontal storer. I believe in horizontal storage generally. I don't like pieces falling out and getting mixed up and everything. I usually like to keep the inserts. So, but sometimes the inserts, if you put it sideways, the pieces fall out or whatever. So I like storing things horizontally. And the problem with these is, so this width is wide enough so you can fit like one. These are wide enough so you can fit like one, say, square Ticket to Ride size box, and next to it maybe one rectangular box like an Agricola, and you can stack them that way. There is wasted space. It is quite nice for vertical stores, so you can see I ended up storing vertically, even though I prefer horizontal. I ended up storing vertically just because I can fit more games in. That's important, you gotta fit as many in as possible. They're a really good fit for the power grid size. So let me show you. So Ravensburger and 2F, 5 Spiele are often in these kind of long box shapes, right? So you can actually fit these end in, and they fit kind of flush with this. They're the perfect depth for that. And you can fit them side by side. You can see how much room there is there. So it's a perfect fit. But the long boxes aren't as common anymore. So if you store horizontal games, I'm not sure the Bestå is the best fit for you. I can just say that even though I'm a horizontal storer like you are, I still love the Bestås. So do something with that information. Thanks for watching. Remember, older board games don't stop being good just because older games come out. Take care.